Hey friends, happy Saturday, the 15th of February. It's nice to be with you. I'm Father Bill Hill, priest at Holy Spirit Catholic Community in Rock Springs, Wyoming. I'll share with you a reflection on the daily readings. The readings are linked below. Click the link, read the readings prayerfully, and then turn off the screen. Spend some time with God before you move on to other things. We are working on a reading from the book of Genesis and from Mark's Gospel. We continue on what sometimes is called the second story of creation, the story of the garden. And now we have the consequences of that first sin of disobedience and consequences of sin. More than anything else, what I'd invite you to reflect on in this particular reading is how the authors of this book show us that the challenges, the flaws, the dissatisfaction in human life isn't because of a failure of God, but rather because of a failure of the creatures. And that is an insight of our Jewish ancestors, right? That God created and it was good, and it was beautiful, and it was paradise, and that human beings chose to reject it. Now, there are weaknesses of pinning so much of this onto human agency, and I'm not going to get into those now, but understand that this form of storytelling and this insight and truth of the inspired texts can also use some additional nuance and reflection in the story of human suffering and evil in the midst of the human family. So a couple of places that I'd invite you to pray. One is kind of the first third of that story. Why did you do this? Who told you that you were naked? I guess is what God asks the man. And he says, the woman whom you put here with me, she gave me fruit from the tree and I ate it. And then he asks the woman, why did you do such a thing? Well, the serpent tricked me into it, so I ate it, right? And this is oftentimes generally seen to be a fairly classic, intentional, like crafted response of irresponsibility and a refusal to acknowledge their choices. And parents, you experience this so much as you attempt to model for children. And frankly, I think that all of us can think about times that we've done it in our own lives and we've experienced other people just shirking responsibility for their own choices. And so, what do you need to pray with about, human choice and agency? This is one of the most mysterious, complicated things about being a human being, that this is one of the great gifts of God, and it is one of the most fundamentally profound ways that we can turn away from God and can abuse our own free will. The ways that we hurt each other and ourselves. What are you struggling to accept responsibility for in your own life? What are you struggling to accept responsibility for in your relationship with God? And what do you need to have a conversation with the Lord for about that? Second thing that I'd point out, there are consequences to sin. And, the book of wisdom says, God did not create death, nor does God delight in the destruction of the living. And the insight there is that sin enters into the human family death enters into the human family because of sin. Rivalry between men and women and a lack of cooperation in the human family, and work and toil and pain and suffering and ultimately death. The authors of the book of Genesis say that did not come from God. That comes from us. What consequence of sin? What portion of a world that was created good but also knows difficulty? What are you most struggling with these days? For me, it might be a bit of the challenges of aging and that. So I just invite you, wrestle a bit with one of these foundational texts of Genesis. Have a conversation with your Creator. Mark's Gospel, briefly. It's the feeding of the 4,000. This is the 8th chapter of Mark's Gospel. We have the feeding of the 5,000 in the 6th chapter of Mark's Gospel. What are we struggling to acknowledge from God, right? Like Jesus doesn't just feed 5,000, then a little bit later he feeds 4,000. Where are we struggling to see God? And God's like, hey, pay attention. Maybe multiple ways that we aren't listening, but ultimately, our denial and our refusal finally breaks down and the Lord enters in. All right, friends, read those readings prayerfully. Turn off the screen. Spend some time with God. If you work regular work weeks, may these be days of rest and recreation for you. God bless y'all.